Maggie Turner never imagined life could change so much in such a short time. Sitting in the back seat of her mom's car, her wedding dress still wrinkled and stained with tears, she watched the streets of Willow Creek, South Carolina, blur past the window. The church was still echoing in her mind. The murmuring voices, the pitying looks, the camera flashes capturing the worst moment of her life. At the altar, right in front of everyone, Jake Hamilton, the man she'd loved since she was 15, had looked at her and just said no, not with words, but with his eyes, filled with shame and disgust, and then by turning his back, walking away from her and everything they had planned together. All because she had gained weight. Maggie squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the memory throbbing in her head like an open wound. "You've changed, Maggie," Jake had whispered during the wedding rehearsal a few days before, trying to be gentle. "You're not like you used to be." She knew exactly what he meant. And it had nothing to do with her personality. Her fingers unconsciously gripped the edge of her dress, feeling the rough fabric against her skin. She thought about all the time she had spent trying to be perfect, trying to fit into the mold everyone else expected of her. And all she got for it was being humiliated in front of everyone she knew. The car stopped in front of her mother's house. The porch lights were on, casting a warm glow that felt cruelly out of place on such a cold, empty night. "You want to come in, sweetheart?" Her mother's voice was gentle, almost fearful. Maggie took a deep breath. "No, I need to think. Just give me a little time alone." Her mom hesitated but nodded, understanding it wouldn't help to push. Maggie walked over to the old swing set in the yard where she and Jake used to spend hours talking about their dreams. She sat down, hugging her knees to her chest, and let the tears fall silently. That night something inside her broke, but something else, something she didn't even know existed, started to grow. Maggie promised herself that would be the last time she ever cried over Jake Hamilton. She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But she swore she would build a life so wonderful, so bright, that one day he would regret every word and every look of disgust. And her? She would never again depend on anyone's approval to feel whole. The cold night wind blew around her, gently rocking the old swing. It was like the universe itself was whispering to her, "Start over." 2 years after that night that had felt like the end of the world, Maggie Turner was parking her rusty pickup truck in front of a small empty space in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. The building was old, the windows broken, and the facade faded from rain and time. But to Maggie it looked perfect. Clutching a folder stuffed with notes and crumpled recipes, she climbed out of the truck, the hot sun beating down on her determined face. She had spent the last few months working 3 different jobs: waitressing during the day, cashiering at a grocery store at night, and cooking for small neighbor orders in the early hours of the morning. Every dollar saved had been for this moment, for this space, for the first step toward the new life she had promised herself she'd build. The idea had come to her like a childhood memory. The smell of cookies baking in her grandma's oven, the sound of family gathered around the table, the comfort of a meal made with love. Maggie knew she wanted to bring that feeling back, not just for herself, but for everyone who walked through those doors. A restaurant, not some fancy place full of complicated dishes and crazy prices, but a real place, real food, real warmth. She took a deep breath, looking at the building the way someone might look at a seed planted in dry soil. There wasn't anything there yet, but she could see it. She always could. The realtor walked up, a skinny man with thinning hair and a wrinkled suit. "Miss Turner," he called out. She nodded, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "It's all yours. Just need your signature here, of course," he said, handing her the clipboard with the lease papers. Maggie looked down at the pages. Her hands trembled a little. It wasn't fear. It was the weight of everything that moment represented. She signed. When she handed the clipboard back, the realtor smiled, though there was that flicker in his eyes, the kind of look that said he didn't think she stood much of a chance. "Good luck, young lady. You're gonna need it." Maggie smiled back, a small but steady smile. "It's not luck, Mr. Whitman. It's work." He chuckled, shrugged, and left. Maggie stood there for a moment, looking at the old, worn-out facade. Then she pushed open the rusty door and stepped inside. The place was a wreck, the floor littered with splintered wood, the smell of mold thick in the walls. But she didn't see any of that. She saw polished wooden tables, families laughing, the clinking of dishes and silverware, the smell of pies and fried chicken filling the air. She saw a future. Rolling up the sleeves of her shirt, she tied her hair into a messy bun and took a deep breath. It was going to be hard. It was going to be exhausting. But for the first time in a long while, Maggie knew exactly where she wanted to go. And she was going to get there. One brick at a time. One recipe at a time. One dream at a time. She smiled to herself, walking to the center of the room where sunlight poured through a cracked skylight, lighting up the dust floating in the air like tiny stars. Right there, in that very spot, she made herself another promise. She would never again let anyone define who she was. And she would never again let anyone steal the beauty of what she could build. The beginning was brutal. For weeks, Maggie practically lived inside that old building. She cleaned, painted, hammered, and sanded until her hands bled. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she screamed out of frustration, but not once, not even for a second. Did she think about giving up? Friends? Hardly any. Money? Next to nothing. Confidence? Just enough to put one foot in front of the other, one day at a time. She watched tutorials online to learn how to make small repairs, begged used furniture off people she knew, and accepted every bit of honest help that came her way. What she lacked in resources, Maggie made up for with pure stubbornness. It was like every brick, every pan, every detail she fixed was also piecing back together the broken parts inside her. The name for the restaurant came to her one cold night, while she sat on the dusty floor sipping cold coffee and staring up at the broken ceiling. Home. Simple. Straightforward. Family. The quiet promise that no matter where you came from or what you had lost in this place, you'd be welcome. Home. She painted the sign with her own hands, messing up the first try and splattering paint in her hair. But when she finished and saw the word shining on the front of the building, Maggie felt her chest fill with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Home opened its doors on a cloudy April morning. No big announcements, no colorful banners, no lines out the door. But in the window, Maggie placed a small, handwritten sign. Food made with love. Come in. Your family here. The first few weeks were slow. 2 customers on the first day, none on the second. Maggie woke up before the sun and went to bed after midnight. Cleaning, cooking, creating new recipes, smiling at every single person who walked through the door. And little by little, like seeds sprouting after the rain, customers started to come. First, it was curious neighbors. Then, local workers. Soon, whole families. They came for the food, simple dishes full of flavor, but they came back for something harder to explain. It was the way Maggie made you feel the moment you stepped inside, like you were coming home after a long journey. It was the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven. It was the soft music playing in the background. It was the genuine smile of the owner, serving you like she was serving her own family. Word of mouth spread fast. Within a few months, home had become the heart of the neighborhood. And Maggie? She kept fighting, day after day, paying off debts, learning how to be a businesswoman, taking care of the restaurant like she was tending a fragile, precious garden. Some nights she would close up the place, sit alone at one of the empty tables, and look around. The soft lights, the walls decorated with old photos, the lingering smell of cinnamon and coffee in the air. And she would smile, because nobody there knew about the wedding dress stuffed away in the back of her closet. Nobody there saw her as the abandoned bride. Here she was just Maggie Turner, the woman who, after losing everything, had found something infinitely more valuable. Herself. A year after home opened, Maggie couldn't handle it all on her own anymore. The lines out the door sometimes wrapped around the block. Local magazines started talking about the restaurant that brings back the taste of childhood. Newspapers ran stories about the young woman who turned an abandoned building into a home for an entire community. Maggie could hardly believe it. She hired help. First a shy waitress named Ellie, then a young, enthusiastic chef named Ben. And with every new person who joined her, Maggie made sure to teach them something no business school ever would. Here, the food matters, but people matter even more. Success never went to her head. Maybe because she knew what it felt like to lose everything. Maybe because she could still feel, now and then, the invisible scar Jake had left when he turned his back on her at the altar. Maggie didn't think about him much. Or at least she tried not to. Every once in a while, though, when she saw weddings being celebrated at the restaurant, home had become a popular spot for small receptions, a sharp little pang would shoot through her chest. She would take a deep breath, smile at the newlyweds, and remind herself, the love she had built here was so much bigger than any lost ring. And life? Well, life had a funny way of coming full circle. It was on a hot, sticky Friday morning when Ellie came running into the kitchen, her face lit up with a mischievous smile. "Maggie, you're not going to believe who just walked in," Ellie whispered, like she was spilling some forbidden secret. Maggie wiped her hands on a dish towel and raised an eyebrow. "If it's that restaurant critic again, tell him I'm busy." Ellie laughed, shaking her head. "No, it's Jake Hamilton." For a second, the world seemed to stop. The name, which she hadn't heard in so long, sounded strange, distant like an old memory from another life. "Jake?" she repeated, her voice sounding steadier than she felt inside. Ellie nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity. "He's out there. Alone. And Maggie, he looks different." Maggie didn't ask what she meant by different. She didn't need to. With her heart pounding against her ribs, she walked over to the kitchen door and peeked out into the dining room. And there he was, sitting at one of the tables by the window, his shoulders slumped, his hands nervously spinning a worn-out cap between his fingers. Jake Hamilton. The man she once thought would be the love of her life. The man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. He looked smaller, less confident, less invincible. For a moment, Maggie felt a tiny pang of sadness. But that's all it was, a tiny pang. Right after, she felt something bigger, stronger, truer. Peace. She wasn't the girl who cried on backyard swings anymore. She was Maggie Turner, owner of the most beloved restaurant in town. She had won. Not despite what happened, but because of what happened. Taking a deep breath, she turned to Ellie. "Take care of that table, please." Ellie blinked, surprised. "You're not going to talk to him?" Maggie smiled. A calm, mature smile, full of meaning. Not today. Because some stories, Maggie knew now, didn't need a final chapter. Sometimes the best ending was simply moving on. And she had so much more living to do. Jake came back. Not that day, not even that week. But the next month, there he was again, sitting at a corner table, looking around like he was searching for something he already knew he'd lost. This time, Maggie didn't hide. She walked out of the kitchen with her head held high, her apron tied around her waist, and a professional smile on her face. She passed right by him just like she would any other customer, without bitterness, without longing, without shame. Jake looked up at her. For a second, Maggie saw the shock flash across his face, like he didn't recognize the woman she had become. And maybe he didn't. The Maggie from before, the girl who tried so hard to fit in, who tried to make herself small not to bother anyone, had died at that altar. What was left now was strength, was light. Jake stood up too fast, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "Maggie," he called, his voice rough, hesitant. Some customers glanced sideways, curious. Maggie stopped, turned calmly, and looked him straight in the eyes. "Can I help you?" Jake opened his mouth, closed it, and then seemed to force himself to go on. I heard about the restaurant. I had to see it for myself." She smiled, but it wasn't the smile he remembered. It was stronger, more distant. "Now you have." He ran a hand through his hair, nervous. You've changed." Maggie tilted her head slightly, like she was giving it a moment's thought. "No, Jake. I just stopped trying to be someone I wasn't." He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe apologize, maybe ask for another chance. But Maggie didn't give him the space. She politely pointed to the menu. "If you'd like to order something, Ellie can help you. If not, the door's the same way you came in." Jake swallowed hard. Shame was written in every line of his face. He sat back down, mumbling something she couldn't hear. Maggie turned and walked back to the kitchen, feeling her heart pounding, not from sadness but from relief. From freedom. That night, while she was closing up the restaurant, Ben, her young chef and all-around loyal friend, walked over, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "So, that guy, X?" Maggie smiled, taking the cup from him. "X everything." Ben let out a low chuckle. "Want to talk about it?" She looked around. The dining room she had built with her own 2 hands, the tables where so many happy stories were being written, and shook her head. There's nothing left to say, Ben. Some people belong in the past, and that's exactly where he's gonna stay. Ben raised his mug in a toast. Amen. Maggie clinked her cup against his, laughing for real. A light, free laugh, full of future. Outside, the city sparkled under the nightlights, and Maggie felt something spark inside her too. She hadn't just survived, she had bloomed, and she was just getting started. It was a regular afternoon at home. The smell of cornbread baking in the oven filled the air, the tables were busy with laughing families, and Maggie was going over the new fall special menu. When Ellie came back into the kitchen, her face looked different this time. Tense, worried. Maggie, she began, holding onto the door frame like she needed something to steady herself. There's someone here asking to see you. And it's serious. Maggie set down her notepad. Who? Ellie bit her bottom lip, uncomfortable. Jake Hamilton. Maggie sighed. Again? She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out. This time Jake was standing by the counter. Simple clothes, thinner face, tired eyes. When he saw her coming, he straightened his shoulders, trying to pull back the old confidence he once wore so easily. But it was too late. Maggie, he said, his voice low, barely carrying over the hum of the busy restaurant. I need a job. The world seemed to spin in slow motion. For a second, Maggie thought she'd heard wrong. But no. Jake Hamilton, the same man who had left her at the altar because she didn't fit the perfect image he wanted to show the world, was now standing in front of her, asking for a chance. She crossed her arms, holding his gaze. A job? She repeated, her voice neutral. Jake nodded, swallowing hard. Things didn't work out after that day. He looked away, shame written in every line of his body. I lost my job at the construction company. Tried to start my own business. It failed. I burned through my savings. I'm trying to start over. Maggie stayed silent for a moment. The restaurant behind her buzzed with life. Dishes clinking, laughter, the warm smell of food in the air. Everything she had built with hard work, with pain, with love. And now Jake, who had once tossed her aside like something worthless, wanted into this world. Jake, she said at last, her voice steady, but without bitterness. You didn't believe in me when I needed you most. You left me behind when I was at my most vulnerable. You didn't just break my heart. You tried to make me believe I wasn't worth loving. Jake lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. I know, he muttered. I was an idiot. Maggie took a deep breath, feeling a rush of emotions. Anger? No. Hurt? Not anymore. What she felt was compassion. She wasn't the wounded girl he had left behind. She was a whole woman now. And that's why, she continued, her voice soft, I really hope you find your way. She took a step closer, closing the distance between them. But it won't be here. Jake closed his eyes like her words had landed a physical blow. Maggie reached out and lightly touched his shoulder. A gesture of compassion, not an invitation. Sometimes, she said quietly, the best thing life can teach us is that we need to change in order to grow. I learned that. I hope you do too. Jake nodded, his expression broken but resigned. He turned and walked out the front door, shoulders slumped, his cap twisted between his hands. Maggie watched him for a moment, then turned and headed back to the kitchen. Ben raised an eyebrow at her. You okay? She smiled, a genuine, calm smile, better than ever. And she knew it was true. Maggie had made it through pain, loss, and abandonment, and now she was living proof that self-love and perseverance could turn even the deepest wounds into wings to fly. After that day, Maggie didn't think about Jake Hamilton anymore. There just wasn't room for it. Her life was full of new projects, new ideas, new dreams. Home was doing so well that, within a few months, Maggie opened a second location, this time on a charming corner in Mount Pleasant, an upscale Charleston neighborhood. She remembered when she could barely afford a sack of flour. Now she was signing leases and hiring entire teams to run new restaurants. But even with all the success, Maggie never forgot who she was. She visited the original home every day, chatted with customers, helped out in the kitchen whenever she could, and personally trained every new employee. To Maggie, every new restaurant wasn't just a business. It was a seed of love she was planting throughout the city, and those seeds were blooming. Newspaper articles started calling her the Queen of Comfort in Charleston, a woman who brought back the city's warm, simple spirit at a time when everything else seemed to be getting faster and emptier. People saw something in Maggie they recognized, something they longed for, a reminder that life could still be beautiful in the simplest things. And Maggie finally saw it too. One afternoon, while overseeing the installation of the new industrial kitchen at the third home location, Ellie showed up, swinging a fancy envelope in her hands. "Special delivery for you, boss lady," she joked. Maggie wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. Inside there was a card printed in gold lettering, "Annual Award for Excellence in Entrepreneurship. Finalist, Maggie Turner." She blinked, stunned. "I got nominated?" she asked, as if she couldn't believe it. Ellie grinned. "Not just nominated. You're the favorite to win." Maggie held the card in both hands, feeling her heart race. Being recognized was nice, but what really moved her was remembering how it all started. A broken heart, a promise made to herself in the middle of dust and mold, a small, fragile dream that she had nurtured into a strong, flourishing tree. That night, Maggie sat on the porch of her new apartment, a simple but cozy loft downtown. She held the invitation in her hands, watching the city lights flicker like stars in the distance. The breeze carried the scent of salt water mixed with jasmine, and Maggie, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to dream bigger. She thought about the home chain spreading across the entire state. She thought about training programs for young apprentices. She thought about expanding not just the restaurant, but the idea that you could rebuild a life from scratch, with courage, faith, and hard work. And maybe, Maggie thought with a shy smile, maybe there was room in her life for something more. Something she wasn't chasing anymore. Something that would come at the right time. Love, but this time, a love that wouldn't shrink her. A love that would see her exactly as she was, whole, strong, and beautifully imperfect. The wind picked up, tossing her hair around, and Maggie laughed softly to herself, the sound light and free in the night. She didn't know yet that fate was already working behind the scenes, and that the next chapter of her life would be as sweet and unexpected as the smell of bread baking in the oven. The new chapter of Maggie's life began on a morning that seemed just like any other. Home was busy, as usual, and Maggie, as always, moved from table to table, helping out in the kitchen and greeting customers with that warm smile that had become her trademark. That's when Ellie popped into the kitchen again, smiling in a weird way. "Maggie," she called, adjusting her apron. "There's a guy out front asking to talk to you. Says it's about expansion." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Expansion?" Ellie laughed, shrugging. "He said he's an architect, wants to talk about possible new projects." Maggie sighed, pulling off her gloves and wiping her hands on her apron. She was used to people wanting to pitch her proposals, but she always preferred to check things out herself. When she stepped through the kitchen door, she spotted him immediately. He was standing near the counter, holding a clipboard, looking around with a genuine expression of interest. Tall, broad-shouldered, with slightly messy brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were simple, dark jeans, a white t-shirt, and a relaxed, unstructured blazer that made him look even more easygoing. But what really caught Maggie's attention were his eyes. Eyes that smiled. When he saw her, his whole face lit up with a smile so sincere that, against her will, Maggie felt her heart skip a little. "Hi," he said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "I'm Ethan Brooks. I work with urban revitalization projects. And..." He glanced around. "This place is amazing." Maggie shook his hand firmly but felt a strange warmth creeping up her cheeks. "Thanks," she replied, keeping her tone professional. "How can I help you, Mr. Brooks?" "Ethan," he corrected, still smiling. "I heard you're thinking about expanding. I work with an initiative that helps local businesses restore old buildings into new commercial spaces. Thought we could talk." Maggie narrowed her eyes, studying him carefully. She had learned to trust her instincts, and everything about Ethan, the easy smile, the open posture, the way he actually seemed to see what was around him, screamed authenticity. "Got a card?" she asked, and he quickly handed her one. She read it. Ethan Brooks, Sustainable Urban Projects. "Interesting. Well, Ethan, you've got good timing," she said, crossing her arms. We are exploring some expansion options, but I'm picky. I don't want to lose what home stands for. Ethan's smile widened. That's exactly why I want to work with you. Maggie blinked, a little surprised. Because you care about what this place represents, he went on, glancing around like he could feel the restaurant's soul. Most places only care about the numbers. You built something real. And I believe in creating spaces people love, not just spaces that look nice. For a moment, Maggie didn't know what to say. It was rare to find someone who understood without her having to explain. She smiled, feeling a small spark inside her chest that wasn't just professionalism. Then have a seat, she said, pointing to a table by the window. Let's talk. And just like that, on an ordinary morning, with no fanfare, no promises, no expectations, Maggie Turner met someone who didn't want to change her, someone who saw the woman she had become and liked exactly that. And even though she didn't know it yet, that would be the first of many conversations that would change the course of her life. Again. But this time, for the better. The conversation with Ethan lasted over 2 hours, and it would have gone even longer if Maggie didn't have a stack of orders waiting in the kitchen. They talked about projects, about the soul of spaces, about the value of the hidden stories tucked into every old wall. Ethan really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but soaking in every word. Maggie realized she had forgotten how good it felt to be listened to like that. When the conversation ended, Ethan packed up his clipboard and stood, smiling. I'd really love to work with you, Maggie. No rush, no pressure. If you ever want to talk again, I'm around. He slid a second business card onto the table, this time with a personal number scribbled by hand on the back. Maggie picked up the card, smiling to herself. She knew exactly what that meant. But unlike before, she didn't feel afraid. She was in charge of her own story now. In the weeks that followed, Ethan came back several times. Sometimes to talk business. Sometimes just to have coffee and listen to Maggie talk about how hard it was to keep the home's soul alive while it grew. And little by little, what had started as work turned into friendship. Ethan was different. He didn't try to impress her, didn't make empty promises, he just showed up. He laughed at the daily little disasters, like the day Ellie dropped a whole tray of cookies on the floor and everyone ate them anyway because they were just too perfect to waste. He helped move furniture around whenever Maggie decided to rearrange the dining room. He listened patiently when she vented about her fears of losing the home's simplicity as it expanded. And little by little, without Maggie even realizing it, Ethan started filling spaces she hadn't even known were empty. One afternoon, while they were discussing plans for a new home location in Somerville, Ethan suggested something unexpected. Why don't we build the new spot around an open kitchen? He said, excited. People could watch the chefs working, see how the food is made, feel the love you put into every plate. Maggie looked at him, surprised. It was brilliant. She had seen fancy restaurants with open kitchens before, but never a place like home, a place of heart, of warmth. Doing something like that, it would be like inviting people to become part of the story. She smiled. You really get what we're trying to build here, don't you? Ethan smiled back, that easy, genuine smile of his. I get you, Maggie. The words hung between them, heavy with something neither dared name just yet. Maggie felt her heart beat a little faster, but she didn't shy away from the feeling. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what might come. She didn't need to shrink or hide. She was who she was. And from the looks of it, Ethan liked exactly that woman. When he said goodbye that afternoon, Maggie stayed sitting alone on the home's porch, watching the sun sink slowly over the horizon. She thought about how life had a funny way of taking away what seemed irreplaceable, only to make space for something so much better. She thought about how she had once cried on the backyard swing, believing everything was lost. And she smiled, because now she knew the truth. Nothing real is ever truly lost. Life just teaches us how to recognize what's truly worth keeping. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Maggie and Ethan became a constant presence in each other's lives, even without labeling or rushing what they were building. It was different from anything Maggie had ever known. With Jake, everything had been about expectations, pressure, appearances. With Ethan, it was lightness, it was truth. He would drop by home for coffee before work, sometimes just to wish her a good day. He helped her review blueprints for new projects on nights when she thought she couldn't think another thought. They laughed together. They shared silences that never felt uncomfortable. And slowly, the space Maggie had once reserved only for herself began to open up for someone who didn't want to take up space. He just wanted to add to it. One Saturday afternoon, after a long meeting about the new home location, Ethan suggested a break. No clipboards, no projects, he said, flashing that carefree smile she was starting to know so well. Just you, me, and the best ice cream shop in town. Maggie hesitated. She knew exactly what this was. It wasn't work. It wasn't just friendship. It was more. But instead of pulling away, she allowed herself to lean in. All right, she said, laughing, but I'm picking the flavor. Ethan pretended to think about it. As long as it's not pistachio. Maggie burst out laughing. You just insulted my entire childhood, Mr. Brooks. He grinned wide, and for a moment, Maggie felt like the ground beneath her feet had gotten just a little lighter. The afternoon was simple. They strolled through Charleston's historic downtown, sharing a cup of pistachio ice cream, which, to Ethan's surprise, was actually really good. They talked about everything and nothing, about childhoods, fears, dreams, about the scars life leaves behind, the ones you can see and the ones you can't. Maggie spoke about her first home, about the wedding dress that never got worn, about the pain that had shaped her. Ethan listened without trying to fix her, without trying to minimize what she felt. He just listened. When she finished, expecting to see pity or discomfort, all she found in his eyes was something that looked a lot like deep respect. You're tough as hell, Maggie Turner, he said, plain and sincere. She smiled, feeling a warm sting of something that felt like pride. I had to be. They kept walking, the sun setting behind the old buildings, bathing everything in gold. And when they reached the front of home, Ethan stopped. Thanks for the afternoon, he said, shoving his hands into his pockets like he wanted to say more but held back. Maggie bit her lower lip, hesitating. For a moment, she thought about how easy it would be to take a step forward. But she also knew there was no need to rush. Everything she needed was already right there. He smiled, a little shy, a little brave. Good night, Maggie. Good night, Ethan. And then he turned and walked away. No rush, no pressure, leaving Maggie standing on the sidewalk feeling for the first time in a long time that her heart was exactly where it was supposed to be. Inside home, life carried on. Orders being taken, plates being served, laughter filling the air. But inside Maggie, something new was blooming, something sweet, something strong, and she knew. Sometimes, the best things in life show up without warning, in the simplest way, and in the most beautiful way. The opening of the new home location in Somerville was more than just the launch of another restaurant. For Maggie, it was the celebration of a new life. She walked through the bright, buzzing space, her heart soaring at every detail. The open kitchen was perfect, exactly the way she and Ethan had dreamed it. The exposed brick walls, the smell of fresh bread wafting through the air, the light wooden tables that seemed to invite everyone to sit and stay a while. It was beautiful. It was her. Friends, loyal customers, neighbors, everyone was there. Home had become a little local legend, a symbol of hope, of new beginnings, of community. Maggie paused for a moment near the entrance, taking it all in. She saw Ellie laughing behind the counter. She saw Ben, the chef, running the kitchen like a maestro, and she saw Ethan across the room, chatting animatedly with some guests. He looked at her right then and smiled. A smile that wasn't just about friendship. It was something more, something Maggie felt echo deep inside her. The night unfolded like a dream. Speeches were made. Maggie was called up to a makeshift stage to thank everyone who had believed in her. She held the microphone, her heart pounding. Thank you, she began, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for believing in this dream. But more than anything, thank you for teaching me that no matter what life takes from us, it always gives us the chance to build something even more beautiful. Applause filled the room. Maggie smiled, her eyes finding Ethan in the crowd. He wasn't just clapping with his hands. He was clapping with his heart. And Maggie felt, stronger than ever, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. When the night wound down and guests began to leave, Ethan came over. He held out 2 glasses of champagne, offering her one. To your new home, he said, raising his glass. Maggie smiled and toasted. Our new home, she corrected. He laughed, the sound warm and real. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the nearly empty room. You built something amazing here, Maggie, Ethan said, his voice soft. She looked at him, feeling the truth in his words. I had help. He tilted his head, studying her. Maggie, she knew by the tone of his voice that something important was coming. I know we've built something beautiful as friends, and I don't want to mess that up, he began, gripping his glass a little tighter. But it would be wrong not to tell you that I feel more than that. The world seemed to stop. Maggie stood there, the glass in her hand and her heart in her throat. It wasn't some grand declaration. It wasn't a desperate plea. It was just the truth. Simple, honest, real. And Maggie knew in that moment she had two choices. She could keep protecting her heart, living safely behind the walls she had built. Or she could trust, not in others, in herself. She took a step forward, set the glass aside, and with a smile that came from every part of her that had once been broken and was now whole, she said, I feel the same. Ethan let out the breath he seemed to have been holding for minutes and smiled, a smile so full of relief and joy that Maggie felt her chest swell. He held out his hand. She took it, and under the soft lights of the new home, they danced without music, just because they could. Just because the moment asked for it. And for the first time, Maggie understood. True love doesn't come to complete you. It comes to dance with you when you've already learned how to dance on your own. The following months were a whirlwind of new things. Home had become a well-known name, not just in Charleston but across the entire state. Magazine features, newspaper interviews, invitations to entrepreneurship events. Maggie, who once struggled to believe in her own worth, was now standing on stages, telling her story with pride. She had become an inspiration to thousands of women. Women who, like her, had once felt too small, too broken, too forgotten. Now they saw in Maggie the living proof that no label, no abandonment, no humiliation could define who they truly were. Ethan stood by her side through it all, not as someone who tried to save her, but as someone who walked alongside her, celebrated every victory, held her hand on the hard days, and let go on the days when she needed to fly on her own. They were two whole worlds who together created something even more beautiful. One Saturday afternoon, while Maggie was organizing the final details for the grand opening of Home's 4th location, Ellie walked into the office wearing a strange expression. Maggie. She hesitated. I think you need to see this. Maggie frowned. Ellie handed her a local magazine. On the cover, in big bold letters, it read, Jake Hamilton, From Fall to Redemption, the businessman who became a waiter to start over. Maggie flipped through the magazine, her stomach churning a little. There he was, featured across several pages, Jake posing in front of a small restaurant in a nearby town. In the article, he shared his story, how he had lost everything, how he had been rejected from dozens of jobs, and how he was now working humbly as a waiter while dreaming of opening his own restaurant one day. Maggie closed the magazine. For a moment, she just stood there still. She felt a faint old tug in her chest, not of pain, but something closer to melancholy. Jake was trying to start over, just like she had, but Maggie knew. The paths they chose were different. She didn't hold any anger. She didn't wish him harm. She simply knew, with every fiber of her being, that it wasn't hers to carry anymore. Not his pain, not his story, not his weight. That night, Maggie and Ethan sat on the rooftop terrace of Home, a bottle of wine between them, the stars scattered above. She told him about the article. Ethan listened quietly, his expression calm. When she finished, he simply said, You don't have to carry that, Maggie. She looked at him. I know. And as she said those words, she felt the deep truth in them. She really knew. She was free. And it didn't matter who did or didn't know her journey. She knew who she was. She knew how hard she had fought to be here, and that was all that mattered. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something? Maggie smiled. Of course. If you could go back in time and change everything, avoid the pain, avoid that day at the church, and would you? She thought for a moment. She thought about the tears, the shame, the loneliness. And then she thought about Home. She thought about Ethan. She thought about herself, the strong, whole woman she had become. She shook her head, smiling softly. No, I wouldn't change a thing. Ethan smiled too. Me neither. They toasted in silence, their glasses clinking softly in the night air. And Maggie knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that her life, with all the falls, all the new beginnings, had brought her exactly where she was meant to be. And this time, she wouldn't just survive. She would shine. And she would never apologize for it again. With the arrival of fall, Maggie felt something inside her changing too. It wasn't like before when change came like a hurricane, tearing everything down in its path. Now, it was like the soft wind scattering golden leaves along the street. A natural, peaceful transformation. Home kept growing. The new location in Somerville was a massive success, and other towns started sending proposals, hoping to host a home of their own. Maggie wasn't just a local entrepreneur anymore. She was becoming a name known throughout the state. But unlike before, when she might have thrown herself headfirst into every new opportunity, Maggie was wiser now. She wanted to grow, yes, but not at the cost of everything she had built with so much love. She and Ethan spent hours crafting what they called the Heart Expansion Plan, a strategy to grow without losing the soul. It was simple. If a new home couldn't keep the spirit of warmth, simplicity, and truth, then it wasn't worth it. Maggie knew success wasn't about numbers. It was about legacy. And she was determined to build the kind of legacy that would inspire people for generations to come. One day, while reviewing contracts in her office, she got an unexpected phone call. "Miss Turner?" said a voice on the other end. "This is the National Small Business Association. We're calling to inform you that you've been chosen as Entrepreneur of the Year." Maggie froze. For a second, she thought she had heard wrong. "Sorry, what?" "Congratulations," the cheerful voice repeated. "You'll be honored at the annual event in New York. Your story has inspired thousands. We can't wait to celebrate you." Maggie thanked them, hung up, and just stood there, staring at the walls of her little makeshift office. Entrepreneur of the Year. Her, the girl who had once been left at the altar because she was no longer good enough. The woman who had been ridiculed, discarded, doubted. Now she was being recognized nationally for turning pain into strength, failure into faith, abandonment into love. She laughed, a small laugh, full of wonder and joy. And then she let the tears come. Not tears of sadness, not tears of revenge, but tears of gratitude. Gratitude for every hard day, for every sleepless night, for every closed door that had forced her to build her own house. That night, she shared the news with Ethan. He pulled her into a strong hug, his smile lighting up his face. "I knew it," he murmured into her hair. "I always knew." Maggie allowed herself to rest in that hug for a moment, soaking in the quiet love he offered her. "Will you come with me?" she asked, looking up at him. Ethan's smile grew even wider. "To New York?" "Thought you'd never ask." Maggie laughed, her heart feeling light. For the first time in a long time, she didn't see the future as something scary. She saw it as an open road, full of possibilities, and more importantly, full of love. The kind of love that doesn't cage you, doesn't demand, doesn't hurt. The kind of love that walks beside you, celebrating every step, every fall, every new beginning. As they toasted to the new achievement, Maggie looked at Ethan, at home, at her entire life. And she thought, I am exactly who I'm supposed to be. And she knew. That was the greatest victory of all. New York felt like another galaxy compared to Charleston. The skyscrapers scratching the sky, the constant blare of horns, the lights flashing at every corner. Everything was fast, bright, urgent, but Maggie didn't feel intimidated. She walked the streets like someone who knew exactly who she was, even when everything around her seemed ready to swallow her whole. Ethan, by her side, carried a clumsy backpack and a smile that said he had never been happier to simply be someone's plus one. The award ceremony would be that night at a fancy event hall in the heart of Manhattan. Maggie had bought a new dress, simple, elegant, without unnecessary sparkle. She didn't want to look like someone she wasn't. When Ethan saw her come out of the hotel room, he stopped, unable to hide his smile. "You are..." He searched for the right word, then laughed, shaking his head. "You're you, and that's perfect." Maggie blushed, laughing. Well, I hope New York's ready for a small-town girl. Ethan held out his arm. Let's show 'em how it's done. The hall was packed. Entrepreneurs from all over the country, journalists, cameras, lights. Maggie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. When her name was called, she walked to the stage, her heels echoing on the polished floor. The spotlights blinded her, but she didn't need to see the crowd. She knew who she was. She knew what she had built. She grabbed the microphone with steady hands. They said I wasn't enough, she began, her voice clear and confident. They said I wasn't pretty enough, thin enough, good enough. The room fell silent. But I'm here today to say that we don't have to be enough for anyone. We have to be true to who we are. We have to fight for our dreams even when no one else believes in them, especially when no one else believes. She paused, looking toward the lights, knowing Ethan was out there somewhere. This achievement isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman and man who were once made to believe they had no worth. We do, and no one can take that from us. The room erupted into applause. Maggie smiled, feeling her soul vibrate. She had won. After the ceremony, at the cocktail party, Maggie moved through the crowd with Ethan, greeting other entrepreneurs, journalists, and guests. And then it happened. As she reached for a glass of water at the drinks table, she felt someone approach. She turned and came face to face with Jake Hamilton. For a second, time stopped. He looked different, thinner, more worn down, his eyes heavy with something Maggie recognized immediately because she had once carried it herself: regret. Jake shoved his hands into his pockets, uncomfortable. Maggie, he said, his voice low. She held his gaze calmly. Jake, he seemed to struggle for words. I saw you on stage. I heard your speech. He swallowed hard. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, for everything. Maggie took a deep breath. Years ago, those words would have been all she had ever wanted to hear. Now they were just echoes. Thank you, she said simply. Jake hesitated. You look amazing. You built something amazing. She smiled, a small smile but full of peace. I know. And with a slight nod, she turned and walked back to Ethan, who was waiting for her on the other side of the room. His eyes only on her. There was no drama, no tears. Because Maggie knew, some people are just chapters in our story, but others are the home we find at the end. And she had already found hers. The flight back to Charleston felt lighter than the one going up. Maggie sat by Ethan's side, looking out the window at the sea of clouds bathed in the sunset's golden light. She rested her head against the glass and smiled. The award, the speech, the encounter with Jake, it all felt like a movie she had watched from the outside, as if that old life, that old pain belonged to someone else. And in a way it did. Ethan looked at her, his gaze soft. Penny, for your thoughts, he joked, nudging her arm gently. Maggie turned to him, smiling. I'm thinking about home. Ethan smiled back. Good thought. They didn't need to say anything else. Charleston was waiting for them. Home was waiting for them. The life they had built together, brick by brick, laugh by laugh, dream by dream, was waiting for them. Back in the routine, Maggie realized that something inside her had shifted, subtly but permanently. She wanted more. Not in the sense of wild ambition. It wasn't about opening more restaurants or gracing more magazine covers. It was deeper. She wanted to expand the love she had learned to build. She wanted to teach other women to believe in themselves. She wanted to create spaces where broken dreams could be stitched back together. She wanted to give back to the world a little of the grace that, despite everything, the world had given to her. One Wednesday afternoon, while reviewing reports in Home's office, she called Ethan over. I have an idea, she said, her eyes shining. Ethan, already used to the way her best ideas always seemed to pop up out of nowhere, smiled and sat down across the desk. Let's hear it. Maggie took a deep breath. What if we started a foundation? Ethan raised his eyebrows, intrigued. What kind of foundation? A foundation to support women who want to start businesses but don't have the backing. Women who've been discarded, doubted, like I once was. She spoke with passion, her hands moving as her words tumbled out. We could offer mentoring, microloans, training. It wouldn't just be about giving money, it would be about teaching, empowering, encouraging. Ethan looked at her like he was watching the sunrise. I think, he smiled, That's the best idea you've ever had. Maggie laughed, feeling a warm surge of emotion in her chest. You think we can really do it? Ethan leaned forward, taking her hand in his. Maggie Turner, you can do anything you set your mind to. That night, sitting on the balcony of her loft, Maggie looked up at the stars. She thought about all the nights she had felt alone, broken, without a future. She thought about all the times she almost gave up. And she smiled, because now she knew. Every fall, every no, every tear, every new beginning. It had all been necessary. It had all been preparation. Not just to build a restaurant, but to build a purpose, an entire life. And she was just getting started. Beside her, Ethan reached out and laced his fingers through hers. No rush, no empty promises, just presence. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the night, the scent of jasmine, the quiet certainty in her chest. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with, doing exactly what she was born to do. And for the first time, she knew there were no limits to what could bloom from here. Because she was no longer the woman who had been left behind. She was the woman no one would ever forget. The home foundation was born from a dream, but it grew like a tree that had been watered for a long, long time. Maggie and Ethan worked side by side, day and night, to build it. They raised funds with local partners, created mentorship programs, invited successful entrepreneurs to give talks, and above all, built a true support network, with no judgment, no elitism. The mission was simple, to give roots to those who had only ever known the fall. Soon, women from all over started seeking out the foundation. Some arrived timid, heads down, too scared even to dream. But over time, something magical happened. The light returned to their eyes. Hope came back to live in their smiles. Dreams, once abandoned in the dark corners of their hearts, found new life. Maggie watched it all with quiet joy. She knew she wasn't just helping change stories. She was helping change futures. 1 year after founding the Home Foundation, Maggie organized the first major official event, the Survivors Gathering, a free, open-air event for any woman who wanted to be inspired, to learn, and to start over. Charleston City Park filled with colorful tents, workshop tables, speakers, music, and food. Home handled the catering, of course. No one would ever go hungry under Maggie Turner's care. As she walked among the tents that day, Maggie felt her heart almost burst with gratitude. There were women who had once been invisible. Now they were laughing, learning, creating, building. Whole families came. Children ran across the lawn. Elderly women danced to the tunes of a local band. It was life, pure and simple. It was exactly what Maggie had always dreamed of. Toward the end of the afternoon, Ethan found her near the main stage. He carried 2 bottles of water and wore a tired but deeply satisfied smile. "Survivors Gathering, huh?" he said, handing her a bottle. Maggie laughed, accepting it. "You saw it? They didn't just survive. They bloomed." Ethan nodded, looking around. "Just like you." Maggie looked away, a shy smile playing on her lips. "I had good teachers," she replied. Ethan laughed. "You were your own best teacher, Maggie." She took a sip of water, feeling the coolness clear the emotion from her throat. "It's strange," she said. "Sometimes I still remember the girl crying at the altar. Sometimes I still feel that fear, that loneliness." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and certain. "But you're not that girl anymore." She looked at him, and for a moment, she saw her whole journey reflected in his eyes. The fall, the rebuilding, the victory, and the love, always the love. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and pink, Maggie was called up to the makeshift stage to close the event. She climbed the steps slowly, looking out at the crowd of happy, hopeful faces. She grabbed the microphone with steady hands, so different from the trembling hands she had once had years ago. And she said, "Some of us learn early that the world can be cruel, that not every love lasts, that not every promise is kept. But I'm here to tell you that pain is not the end of the story." She paused, letting the silence wrap around her words. "Pain is the soil where the strongest flowers grow." Applause filled the air, but Maggie continued, her eyes shining. "And today, looking at all of you, I see a garden. And what a beautiful garden we are building. Tears ran freely down her face this time, and she didn't try to stop them, because now Maggie Turner knew. Being strong wasn't about not crying. It was about crying, and still choosing to bloom. Always. After the survivors' gathering ended, Maggie stayed until the very last moment at the park. She helped fold chairs, pack up tents, and box up leftover food, just like she always did, never placing herself above anyone. When the last truck pulled away and the park grew silent, Maggie sat at the edge of the empty stage, her light dress fluttering in the warm night breeze. Ethan showed up a moment later carrying 2 coffees. "Knew I'd find you here," he said, handing her a cup. Maggie smiled, accepting it. "You know me well." He sat down beside her, their knees almost touching. For a while, they just sat there in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the city, the rustling of the trees. Then Ethan turned toward her. "Maggie," he began, his voice low. She looked at him, her heart beating in a calm rhythm, not with anxiety, but with a good kind of expectation. "Have you ever thought," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "about building something more with me?" Maggie frowned slightly, curious. "More?" Ethan smiled in that way that made her stomach feel warm. "I'm not just talking about restaurants, not just the foundation. I'm talking about home, life, family." Maggie felt the air catch in her lungs. For a second, flashes of old fears and insecurities crossed her mind, the old ghosts whispering she would never be enough, but they faded as quickly as they came. Because next to Ethan, she never had to be anything but herself. She took a deep breath, letting the words flow out as simply as the sun rises every morning. "I think about it every day." Ethan's smile widened fully, lighting up his entire face. He reached into his pocket, and for a second, Maggie thought he might pull out a ring, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled out a small handmade wooden keychain with 2 initials carved into it, M+E. "This is a start," he said, placing the keychain in her hand. "A key. When you're ready, we'll build our home. However you want. In your time." Maggie looked at the keychain, her eyes blurring with emotion. It wasn't a rushed marriage proposal. It was an offer, an invitation, a silent promise that the love they had didn't need to be hurried or forced. It only needed to be lived. She closed her hand around the keychain and smiled, feeling that this small object carried the weight of the whole universe in meaning. "I'm already ready, Ethan." Ethan let out a choked laugh and pulled her into a tight hug. There, in that quiet park, under the first stars of the night, they sealed something stronger than any contract, any ceremony, any promise spoken out loud. It was the daily choice to walk side by side, to build together, to believe, even after everything, to love, for real. As they walked back to the car, hand in hand, Maggie looked up at the sky. She thought of the girl who once believed she had been broken forever, and she smiled. Because now she knew, some breaks aren't the end. They're the beginning of something infinitely more beautiful. Months after that night in the park, Maggie and Ethan moved into a simple house, surrounded by old trees and a wide porch where she could already picture lazy afternoons and starry nights. It wasn't a huge house. It wasn't grand. It was a home, and they built it together, every choice made with 4 hands, from the color of the walls to the smell of cakes already baking in the new oven. It was the home Maggie hadn't even known she wanted, until she understood she deserved it. Home continued to thrive. The locations kept growing, with responsibility and heart. The home foundation spread to neighboring towns, helping dozens, and then hundreds, of women rebuild their lives. In every restaurant, in every project, in every recovered smile, there was a piece of Maggie's journey. But now she understood something even greater. The true victory was never about proving to the world that she was capable. It was about proving to herself that she could be happy without shrinking, apologizing, or hiding. One golden afternoon, Maggie sat on the porch of their new house, a mug of tea in her hands, looking at the garden just beginning to bloom. Ethan was working in the vegetable patch, laughing with Tommy, the rescue dog who had quickly become the family's darling. She watched the scene, her heart full. It was simple, and it was everything. Ethan, dirty with soil and happy, looked up at her and smiled. that smile that made everything around seem lighter. Maggie smiled back. There, without applause, without headlines, without witnesses, she lived the most victorious moment of her life, because true success, she now knew, wasn't a trophy on a shelf. It was peace. It was knowing that no matter what happened, she had built something solid inside herself, something no one could ever take away. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warm evening breeze play with her hair. She thought about the girl who once dreamed of being loved, the young woman left at the altar, the woman who built her own world with scarred hands, and all the other women who were just starting their journeys. Then, as if speaking directly to them, to the women of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, Maggie whispered, smiling, "You are stronger than you know, more beautiful than you believe, more capable than you dream, and your new beginning might just be the start of your best chapter." She opened her eyes and saw Ethan walking toward her, reaching out his hand. "Come on, Maggie," he called, wearing that easy smile she loved so much. "Where to?" she asked, laughing. "To life," he answered. And she went, without fear, without looking back, because now she knew. It wasn't what she had lost that defined who she was. It was everything she had fought for, and won, inside and out. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the sky, Maggie Turner danced on the porch of her new home, laughing like someone who knew that life sometimes takes its time. But it always comes. And when it comes, it's infinitely more beautiful than she ever could have imagined.